If you will, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Psalm 124. Psalm 124. I said this morning that we're going to try to devote the rest of the Sunday evenings of the year to encouragement, to edification, to building each other up. Sometimes we think of encouragement only as somebody giving a pat on the back, but there's a lot more to encouragement. Encouragement means our courage is lifted. Our courage is lifted to live for God. Is that any better? We'll try that. Is that any better? All right, good. But anyway, so that's what we want to do for the rest of the Sunday nights from here on out, Lord willing, if He allows us to go through the end of this year. Now, I want to ask you something. If I ask you what would be the scariest question in your mind, what would it be? What would be the scariest question in your mind? Something that if you ask it, it brought fear to your life. There would probably be a lot of different answers if I asked that. But biblically speaking, I think the scariest question that could ever be asked is this: what if God wasn't on our side? That should be a terrifying question. What if He was not on our side? Would it scare you if you knew that God was not on your side? I wouldn't make it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I wouldn't make it. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't make it. If I knew that I had nothing to live for, if I knew that God did not want me and He wasn't on my side, man, that's terrifying to me. And that's really what is addressed here in this short psalm. In Psalm 124, what would happen if God was not on our side? Well, it would be a somber situation, I believe, if that were the case. But it doesn't have to be. And that's the beautiful thing about this psalm. It doesn't have to be. So as we think about this and we go through this, I'm no literary, I have to provoke myself to read things other than the Bible or related to the Bible. There's a few novels I'll read. But I do remember from school days a novel. I don't remember anything about the story. But Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. If anybody remembers the start of that, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And that's really what we find here. There is a best case scenario, there is a best situation, and then there's the worst situation. And that's where we're at in this psalm. Now, I'm going to give you a little background on this psalm. It's a song of ascents. It's a short psalm. It's a song of ascents. And ascent means exactly what we would ascend. To go higher. To take it to a higher level. And the idea behind these psalms, there were multiple uses for these psalms. They were used in some cases for their pilgrimages, the Jews, as they went to Jerusalem. Many times when you see Jerusalem, when it talks about them going to Jerusalem, what did it say? They went up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem had a high elevation. So they would go up to, it wasn't on the map where they went north. They went up in elevation to Jerusalem. But as they were on their pilgrimage, they needed something to boost them. There were a lot of old spiritual songs meant to boost people up. And that's what they needed. You ever walked for any distance? Hike? I mean, they would walk miles and miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, to get to their place of worship, to get to the temple, to get there to worship, and they needed something to lift them up as they went up in elevation. Also, these psalms were sung as the priest ascended the steps into the Jerusalem temple for worship. The point was, it was to remind them about the God they served, about Jehovah God, Yahweh, to remind them of the powerful God they served and all the things he had done, because they were about to do something very serious. I'm not sure we take it seriously enough, but they were about to worship. Worship is very serious. It's okay to smile in worship. It's okay to enjoy worship. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it's wrong to enjoy worship. We ought to enjoy worshiping God. It's okay to worship God with a smile on your face. Now, as we think about it, though, it's also a time of reverence. And that was a lot of what this was, to remind them about what they were about to do. They were going to worship in their pilgrimage, or the priests were leading that song to remind them, as Charlie was saying in his prayer, that we're so dependent on you. That's really what this is about. But anyway, now it's hard to pin down the exact background of what was going on here because some of the ancient manuscripts do not ascribe this to David. So it's hard to know. Scholars are kind of, but it doesn't matter. Some see it as a post-exilic. That means after the exile, they find this story to relate to Esther's situation when Haman had plotted against the Jews and was about to have them slaughtered. Was going to have Mordecai hanged, and they were about to slaughter all the Jews if Esther would not have stood up and did the brave thing she did, trusting in God. Now, many find David in this, and that's fine too. The point is, it doesn't matter. It could be the situation with David and the Philistines that we find in 2 Samuel 5:17 and following. Some find it because of the water, how the water rose up. But the thing is, there it's talking about God went through them like a rushing water, the Philistines, and just tore them up. But this is talking about the enemy swallowing people up. So that's probably, I don't know. The point is, it doesn't matter. The message is the same. Without the Lord, Israel would be destroyed because their strength was only in the name of Jehovah God. So as we think about that, they were only going to be victorious if they had the Lord on their side. And it happened so many times when it was physically impossible, they were victorious because God was on their side. Now, the psalmist here introduces the idea, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. If it had not been the Lord who was on, that's the thought. That's the theme of this psalm that he is introducing there in verse 1. But then he says, let Israel now say. Now, in the Jerusalem Bible, the Hebrew Bible, you find, let Israel repeat this phrase. Let them repeat this phrase. It might be good for us to put that phrase in our mind. If God was not on my side, where would I be? That's the idea. And the point is, with that repeating that in their mind, they were to always remember, God, I've got to have you. I've got to have you in my life, God. I need you. And that is what it's all about, always remembering. Now, in verses 2 through 5, we find the worst of all possible situation. God is not on Israel's side, and we could put ourselves there. We could say, if God was not on our side, that's a bad situation. That's a bad situation. And you find in 2 through 5, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us, this is what would happen. If God was not on our side, then the wicked would devour Israel. There it is. Then they would have swallowed us alive. This is graphic language here. Swallowing a person alive. Have you ever felt like that? Something was swallowing you up? I mean, we have movies about monsters swallowing people, Jurassic Park and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the picture that would have been going. They were going to swallow us alive. When their wrath was kindled, when it was hot, their anger was fierce against us. They wanted to wipe us out. I don't think we might have had some conflict, but I don't think any of us has ever felt truly that they were so angry they just wanted to eat us alive. That's how I think of Stephen. They were so angry with Stephen. What did they do? They gnashed their teeth. They were doing that. while he was, I can't imagine. If I looked out and I saw people going, I'd run out the door. I mean, that's just, but they would have been divided. It was like a predator and a prey. I'm sure many of y'all seen movies where the tiger or the cheetah chases down and they just, and it's over. As that animal just can't do anything in the jaws of the predator. Then they would have swallowed us alive when their anger was hot against us. In verses 4 and 5, then the waters would have overwhelmed us. The stream would have gone over our soul. Then the swollen waters would have gone over our soul. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of things that could be coming to your mind when it comes to Israel and flood waters. I mean, the Red Sea could come to your mind. What would have happened? Can you imagine them walking over on dry ground and looking at water, walls of water, fish swimming in that water? Can you imagine? Have you ever thought about that? What it was like for them to walk over on dry ground and watch. I wouldn't want to of course, you could walk across the top of the Yazoo at times. It gets so muddy, but think about what you might see there. I can't imagine what it was like, but just thinking, if it wasn't for God, this water would... it'd be over. Things like Noah. I mean, we talk about the ark, about Noah. It floated because of Noah, and it did in a sense. But what kept that ark afloat? What kept that thing from being destroyed? God. God kept that thing afloat. I know there was a pattern. I get that, but it was God. It was all about God. Now, isn't there an enemy that hates us, that wants to swallow us up? Isn't that the picture we're given in 1 Peter 5:8? The devil roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may what? Devour. He wants to eat us up spiritually. He wants to, and I want you to keep that verse in mind, 1 Peter 5:8. Keep it in your mind as we go to the best of all possible situations. In verses 6 through 8, our help is in the name of the Lord. That's the best possible situation. The true realization, our help only comes from God. It only comes from God. Now it comes through His people, but who is the source of it? God. God. Verses 6 through 8. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. There it is. Our soul has escaped as a bird from the snare of the fowler. The snare is broken and we have escaped. That's what we find. God's people are not destroyed because God is on their side. Israel was not destroyed so many times. Gideon and 300. What happened there? God happened there. What happened in those situations where they were outnumbered so many times? God happened. God happened. Kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump. And he said, and then God showed up. And He did. And that's what we see here. God, we see God, or should see God. The people are delivered from their foes like a bird from a trap. My daddy either made me or bought me, I think he made it for me, a bird trap one time. And we put corn all around it and underneath it, and it was a wooden thing, like little bitty wooden things. I can't even describe it. It looked like a pyramid almost. And you had a little stick trigger. And you could either have it with the string and watch them and pull it when them blackbirds would get up under there. I don't know what we're going to do. We're sure going to eat them. Or they would bump that trigger and make it fall on top of them, collapse. But here it's talking about a snare. The idea of a snare is like a loop. I know that's what we use with catching coyotes. And they would go through it and that thing would crown around them and they would die. But here you find the snare. It's almost like they got caught because the snare was broken. And we have escaped. It looked like it was all over. You ever felt like that? It's all over. But then God happens and we escape. You ever seen that? Probably 1 Corinthians 10:13 comes to your mind. Every temptation that comes along, God will make a what? Way of escape. Why were these things happening? Because their help was in the name of the Lord. They realized the power of God and how dependent they were on God. Look at verse 8. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. That's calling back to creation, calling back to God speaking a universe into existence. That's the God I want to serve. That's who I want. That's where my trust is. What about you? I want to trust the one that created me, because the one that created me knows me better than anybody. What about you? Do you believe that? Do you believe God spoke the world? I think everybody here, you wouldn't be here on Sunday night if you didn't believe that God spoke the world into existence. That's your God, right? Is that your God? Now, I told you to remember 1 Peter 5:8. 1 Peter 5:8, that the devil roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Now, what does he tell us there? I know he talks about fleeing, in places, but here he doesn't say run from the devil. He says resist the devil. Resist him. He's saying fight against a lion? Are you, God, what are you asking? Fight against him. Steadfast, in verse 9, resist him steadfast in the what? Faith. There it is. Yes, faith. Resist him steadfast. That's what it's about. That's what this psalm is about. God is who he is, and I trust him with all my might. Because where would we be without him? And that's why that song, without him, I couldn't do anything. I wouldn't be anything. Neither would you. Do you believe that? Do we believe that? Do we truly believe it? That's what it's about. It's not about what we've done. That's not what faith is about. Now, does faith and doing coincide? Well, you better believe it. Faith and obedience are like that. But it's about trusting God. And if we truly trust him with all of our being, doing his will not be a problem. Because we will readily say, I want to please you, God. You're my creator. You're my sustainer. You're my everything. And without you, I wouldn't be anything. And that's why we can say our help is in the name of the Lord. It's in the power of God. It's in the might of God. Because we're weak. We need strength, don't we? And it only comes from God. Now, in the New Testament, there are so many passages to ensure us that God is with his people. Hebrews 13:5-6. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And he goes on to say, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Well, he may destroy this physical body, but God will save our spiritual body. Or whatever. We've talked about that. Matthew 28:20. Jesus, some of his last words. Could you imagine any better words before Jesus just goes off into the heavens? And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Even till I come back, I'm with you. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel like, I can do this thing called life, but I can't? God can. God can help me. Romans 8:31, we looked at that this morning. If God is for us, who can be against us? Nobody. Nobody. The lesson of this psalm is clear, and it actually echoes back to another psalm, Psalm 20 and verse 7. There, the psalmist writes, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but our help is in the name of the Lord. We trust in the name of the Lord our God. By the way, I know I've heard some people say devotional songs aren't that spiritual. Both of these are devotional songs, both of them. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, that's a beautiful song. Google it tonight. I challenge you to do that. Some trust in the chariot. See, the chariot and the horse was a sign of power. And some trust in those physical things, but not God's people. God's people can overcome chariots, and they did. They could overcome Calvaries, and they did, because their help came from above. Their help came from God. Where's your trust tonight? Because God being on your side depends on where your trust is. If you say, I'm going to trust in physical things, I'm going to trust in stuff, God's not going to be on our side. I don't know how, I can only speak the truth. But if we say and we acknowledge God is it, without Him, that's all I've got, He will be on our side, because we'll do whatever He asks us to do, especially when it comes to the gospel or whatever we need to do. Remember, our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. If you need to respond to the Savior's invitation, it's open to you tonight. It's together we